Right.
For either or both, now that you've had a little bit more time to digest what's gone on this season and I guess separate that from whatever you felt after the final game, how would you, I guess, assess where you guys have come, how far you've come this season, and what your next steps are that you need to do to get to the next level?
They've hurt me all year. You can go.
Look, I think you look at this close to the end of the season, it's hard. It's still raw, the loss and so forth. But again, it's important to go back and debrief on it and look at the positives that have come out of this. And there's a lot of positives you can go from. Again, we've talked about the development of whether it's players, staff, the process, the identity that's been established, the culture that's continuing to evolve and so forth. So I think I can pick things from whether it be coaching, performance, front office, whatever it is. Obviously, the players ultimately, but there's been a lot of positives out of this. Again, it's something you've heard Kenny say a lot. We're not satisfied. We know that this is just sort of that one rung in the ladder that we're continuing to climb here, and it's a step in the right direction.
For Sean, what impact do you think that the way you went about it, trying to build a winner, will have on prospective free agents, with the young core you've got developed? And also, when you go into free agency, how do you weigh the age factor with any free agent that you would sign, versus a young guy versus an older guy who might be in decline at the end of his contract?
Mm-hmm. Well, to answer the second part of that first, the age factor, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Obviously, age is definitely one of them. Talent, analytics, fit, system fit, personality, culture fit, everything you can possibly think of. We'll be weighing and looking at and seeing how that fits with our build. Like we've said from sort of day one here, being systematic and strategic along the way and not skipping steps. I mean, you've probably heard that to almost nauseum now, but that's kind of what we have to continue to do. And our job here is to find the right guys that fit with Kenny and with the group that's going to be returning here and go from there and continue to build. Well, I think the process that we went through this year, and there's a lot of positives that have come out of this year, can only help. And I think it's, it goes back to really establishing an identity and establishing that we're going to go out there every night. Our guys are going to compete. Kenny and the staff have got them playing at a high level, competing. They're never out of games. It's going to attract free agents. People are going to want to play here. They're going to want to play for Kenny. They're going to want to play in Brooklyn. They're going to play for this ownership group. And I think we have a lot of things going for us.
Sean, obviously you guys don't have enough cap space for a max free agent unless you guys make some moves. Is that the plan to get to that where we'll have a max slot available?
I think from day one here, it's always been about maintaining flexibility, and we'll see as these next few months unfold. As we get into free agency into July, we'll see where we have to go from there. Do we pivot? There's a lot of different directions we can go. I can't tell you now if we're going to be signing one or two guys or 10 guys or however it goes. But again, I think that's just we've got time to try and establish and make good sound judgment decisions. And we'll see where it goes from there.
And just follow up on D'Angelo. You're gonna have to make a decision on him to see if he's somebody you want to build a team around. Now, obviously, you guys are big on analytics, and he's not an analytics type player. He shoots the mid range. He doesn't get to the foul line very much. What are your thoughts on him as somebody you can build a team around?
Well, I think you look at it and you say he's an effective type player, right? Maybe he doesn't necessarily fit one particular analytics mold, but if you look at D'Angelo, and you could probably lump a lot of our guys into this, where how they've developed, how the habits have changed over the course of not only this season but the last few seasons we've had them here. Our job is to establish the identity of what a net is, and our job is to continue to have put talent on the roster. He's obviously one of our more talented players, so You said that we'll have decisions. D'Angelo's going to have decisions too. So that is a little bit of the nature of this business. But our job at the end of the day is to continue to put talent on the floor for Brooklyn.
Kenny, Jared Dudley called Jared Allen a real key for you guys going forward. When you look back at his second year, how would you kind of evaluate his progress in terms of what you wanted from him, what he accomplished, and what you want to see next?
First of all, I agree with Jared. I think it's one of our priorities this offseason. Keep him on a kind of improving plane. So, listen, I was really impressed at how he improved during the playoffs alone, from game 1, to game 5. How he just kept getting better. His rebound improved this year. But he's a key cog. He's still 21. I think in our exit meetings yesterday we talked to him about the things we want him to work on, and I expect him, in 2-3 years to be an elite center in this league. I think he's going in that direction, and really thrilled with his development so far.
Hey, Sean, I know you played in this league and you coached in this league. Now you're executive. What happened after Game 4? Was that just a case of kind of competitive spirit taking over in that moment, or can you address that at all?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of a few factors, really. Obviously, I don't condone breaking league rules and so forth, and I've apologized to the powers that be on that one. But at the end of the day, it's I think it's a combination of things. It's about standing up for your team. It's about standing up for what you believe in, and sending a message at what I deem to be the right time and so forth. But I don't want to get into the situation, really.
Sean, you obviously got a lot from the veteran trio with Jared Dudley, Damari, and Ed. Maybe more than some would have expected coming into the year. But when you look at what they were able to do, especially with the way they mentored D'Angelo, how does that factor at all into your evaluation process of potentially bringing them back? Obviously, you got a lot to juggle this summer.
Yeah, I mean, you said it right, Mike. We do have a lot to juggle and so forth, but those guys were tremendous, and I don't think you can say enough about what they did, and I think you guys see it on the court. I'm not sure you see all the things that go on behind the scenes with having good veteran leadership and help. They're almost like an arm for Kenny, where he can rely on his coaching staff, can rely on the message being conveyed to the players, through those guys, and they were all terrific in a variety of different ways.
Sean, all through the season, rebounding was an issue, and obviously in the Philadelphia series it was as well. Would you say that adding size should be a priority in the draft and in the free agency period?
Yeah, I think we'll look at adding a lot of different things, and it comes down to just adding talent as well. I mean, just adding size doesn't necessarily get it done. I think you've got to, again, factor in the talent, the system fit, what you're looking for. I could probably go down a list of things just like Kenny can, say, well, I'd like that, and this. And, it comes a point where you can't get it all at once. And, I think if we try to do that, that's when all of a sudden you fast forward the model, you fast forward the build, and you end up, perhaps having to dig yourself out of a hole. But, we'll target the strategic people, whether it's through the draft or free agency or trades and so forth, and go from there.
Hey, Sean, listening to the guys yesterday, particularly the veteran guys, there wasn't sort of this kind of call to keep this team together and let's build it. There was very much the Nets need a star, a home run type player. And I imagine if that's the team, the fans and media are going to be saying that even more so. Is there sort of a pressure now that you were able to build slowly for a couple of years, and now, you might be a player or two away, and you got to, go get one of those guys now?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. I'm not sure that there's pressure to act frivolously or just out of the norm. I think this is something that if the right player is available, obviously like any other team, we'll target those guys. But we'll just see how this builds out. And again, not about fast forwarding, not about skipping steps, but again, at the right time. And I think we've, and it's there's a lot of people that have, played major roles in getting the team to where it is now, and getting the team, the organization, the identity to where it is, having us even have these sort of conversations, and that's exciting.
Maybe just to follow up on that, do you have some advantage maybe you feel like versus a 15, 20, 25 win team that you maybe can see what the piece is you need, what you have already now versus some teams who basically need everything?
It's tough to really comment on what other teams may need. I'm to be honest, focused on what we need. What Brooklyn needs and how we're going to build this one here. I think we have a pretty good idea of the strategic players. Maybe we target, but also again, there's a lot of free agents and players that we'd like to keep on our own team here. So that's a priority too.
For Kenny, going back to the size question. Game after game, the one thing that hurt you guys was the big low post player, the Drummonds, the Embiids, the, other guys in that mold. Do you think that type of player could ever fit in your system? Would it be something that Sean should look at, or that you should look at adding to the system?
Listen, I think like Sean says, I think when you're looking at it's best player available, and not necessarily saying, well, we need this one thing. I don't think we're there yet. That being said, definitely could coach a guy like that. Definitely would fit in our system. I would say this year I was pleased. Obviously Jared is a young guy, and I think we all understand that, and still gaining strength, and we expect him as the years go on to be more resistant to those type of players. And then we had Ed Davis as our backup, who I was thrilled with and was a great system fit. So I think we have to be careful of the rebounding thing, the size thing, because I think it's especially the rebound thing. It's not just a center position. It's all around the roster. You have to rebound at all positions in today's game. And quite honestly, when you look at the playoffs last night, I see a lot of 6'7" guys running around out there. So we also have to understand where the NBA is going. But I liked our roster this year, and I was pleased with the size we had. So it's not necessarily a target for us. Just getting one big guy.
Kenny, there was one game or pregame press conference where you were talking about, hey, I've grown as a coach since year one. I feel like I've grown with these players as a coach. In these end of season settings, we always ask players like, hey, is there anything specific you want to work on with your game this summer? I'm just wondering for you, like based on where you are now, is there anything in the offseason where you look at as a head coach and you say, hey, I want to dig into this a little more, I want to tweak this, and can you talk about that at all?
No, yeah, I'd really like to. I think it's those last 15 games and the playoff. I feel like they were all playoff games, and sure, we analyzed those games and went through it. But I'd really like to go back and look at that end of the season, really analyze the playoffs closely, and because it's as we all know, it's a different animal, and I think there are things I could have done better, and I'm going to analyze it, look at it. Work on it, and then, as always, I think you're doing a review of the season and on both sides of the ball and seeing things you can tweak. Obviously, it depend with the players we have on our roster next year, but there would be a thorough review, and I know just all around I have to get better. I just like the players, I have strengths and weaknesses, and I'm going to keep working on them.
This is the first time since 2013 where you have your own pick. It's the highest pick you've had since 2010. Are you looking at the draft any way differently this year than you would have over the last several years where you had lower picks? And does the fact that you'd have to spend $4 million guaranteed on 2 first-round picks going to affect what you'll be doing come draft night?
I think that's all a good problem to have. So the fact that we have, multiple picks is terrific. It's just more tools in our toolbox. And I think it would be really irresponsible to say, well, we're going to use it in this way or that way. I think, you guys have heard me talk before. We really don't know how we're going to use them. You're going to have to be flexible and see where it goes. And obviously, if the right guys are there and the guys that we're targeting in the draft, we'll welcome them, we'll develop them, and we'll love them and care for them like we do everybody else. And if we feel that maybe strategically it's more in alignment with what we're trying to do is to move one, two, or all, we'll go from there and see where it goes. So can't really give you a definitive answer on that one, Bob.
In asking D'Angelo yesterday whether he would rather, I guess, be locked up here long-term quickly or go out on the market and, for lack of a better term, have the market tell him what he's worth. He said he wants to be here, but he also says, listen, I don't know anything about the process because I've never been through it before. And he understands that he could basically, in essence, be a casualty if you go out and look for some other players. I'm curious, you said he has decisions to make himself. Is there at least some sort of understanding, I guess, between you and he, how the team values him, and then his decision now is whether he wants to agree to those terms? Or has that conversation not even taken place yet?
I think the conversations that have taken place are over his entire time that he's been here. And those conversations are between he and Kenny, are between myself and D'Angelo, they're between the doctors, the performance team, the staff, and it's really about a holistic view of how we care for our guys. And I would think I could put D'Angelo and the rest of our guys in the lump them all together and say, I think they know how we appreciate them, how we care for them, how we want to develop them. And that's part of the restricted free agent pitch, if you will, for him. It's not going to happen in 1 day or 1 hour or a 15-minute conversation. This is something that's happened for 18 months, for 2 years, for a year, however long these guys are here. I think D'Angelo knows how we feel about him. As I mentioned before, our job is to keep talent on the floor and to get better talent and to keep developing that talent. And so we'll see where it all ends up.
2 questions for Sean. You said you're not concentrating on what other teams are doing or need, but you're concentrating on what you guys need. So what do you guys need?
Specifically free agency?
Yeah.
Again, without obviously naming players and so forth, I think it's the part of free agency is continue to keep your own, continue to develop your own. And the other part is how can you continue to add pieces that fit with what you already have, fit with your style, fit with your, honestly, almost where your team is in your little life cycle here. And, can we take a couple steps forward? And if that's the case, and if the right, talent wants to be here and they fit with what we're trying to do, and you mentioned before, the age factor, there's a lot of factors that go into that. So, I think Kenny and I both know that, we're going to be in search of a lot of things for as long as we're here,
And you guys, I'm sure, I don't know if you expected to make the playoffs or you set that as a goal, but now that you did, what is the next step? Like, what can you set as the goal for next season?
Well, I think if, when you look back at when the players preseason had their media availability, and if it wasn't to a man, it was, 10 of them all said, our goal is to make the playoffs. Why can't we do this? And it was really led by a lot of our vets, which is great. So, I don't think Kenny and I or anybody else had to stand up and say this was going to be our goal for the year. They continued to push even through when we had some adversity, when Karras obviously was hurt and so forth. These guys continued. It was almost that next man up mentality, which is great. So moving ahead next year, a lot will depend on where the roster fits before we set out and say, hey, our goal for whether it's, playoffs or wherever it may be in the playoffs, it'll be predetermined by how that roster looks.
Sean, obviously, with the way the season turned out, to most, obviously, it would be overachieving. When you're doing your evaluation process of the roster and the team maybe does better than the collective thinking or the media would think, does that alter your view on how you're going to proceed going into the summer, whether it be the draft or free agency? Does the season change your thinking at all? And if so, how?
Does it change? You know, I think you look at the overall development of the individuals, and certainly your opinion changes throughout the season. It's allowed to change. It should change. You should evolve with your roster and how they develop as the course of the season or their careers, where they're trending and so forth. You know, I don't know that we're going to jump to too many conclusions and so forth, and we'll just, you know, we got to see where it goes, I guess, from here.
For Sean over here, with Levert, do you look at what happened to him last year, the injury, as a freak thing, or do you see that as symptomatic of he's a more fragile type of player? Where is he at after all the work he put in to come back? And you know, how do you look at him in terms of, you know, signing him to the extension?
Well, I wouldn't want to lump him into one of those categories that you just mentioned. That's for sure. You know, I think a guy like Karras, you know, could that injury have happened to anybody else? I have no idea. That's definitely above my pay grade and certainly not my area of expertise. You know, I look at it more from a standpoint of, what did we see the last couple of weeks? What did we see when he was back at full strength? And you know, maybe he wasn't at full strength and full rhythm. When you've been out for 3 months of the season, you know, it's going to be tough to just judge a guy on that. But I think you look at the fiber of what he's made up of. I mean, we were all impressed with, you know, how he bounced back from that, how he competes on a daily basis, and you know, we see the competing on the floor. What I don't think we will see is how he competes, you know, in the weight room and in the performance area, and how he takes care of his body and so forth, and that whole rehabilitation process. So, you know, again, we'll address Karras at the right time.
Sean, I heard Bob Myers, Golden State, talk about how he puts a lot more weight on his evaluations of players in the playoffs versus the regular season. I mean, considering a lot of these guys just went through it for the first time, how much do you agree with that, and how do you weigh playoff performance versus regular season performance?
I mean, I would tend, you know, to agree with Bob. I think Bob's had quite a bit more experience of evaluating players in the playoffs, so that's a great thing. But I think he's right. I think he's onto something. You want to see how players perform when the lights are a little brighter. You know, when there's a little more attention, there's a little more media, there's a little more scrutiny on your game. But having said that, you also don't want to forget and get caught up in that. And you've got to look at the whole process. You've got to look at the whole career, the whole development cycle of what these guys have put in and where they've come from, and the trajectory and the plane that Kenny mentioned earlier.
Aside from the success on the court, you guys seem to have an entertaining team that was likable and connected with fans. Did this group make an impact in terms of reinvigorating or even growing the fan base? Do you guys look back at the season in that context at all?
Yeah, I do, and I think that was definitely one of the bright spots of this season. Was because you can't fake that. That's genuine. It's got to be real. And I think when you see, you know, Alan and Theo, Janan, who were in Long Island and bouncing back and forth, and our players asked for them. You know, the Brooklyn Nets guys that were here were saying, "Hey, when are they coming back? We need them around. We love having those guys around," and it's contagious. I think you see the play on the court, you see how the guys compete, you see that, you know, it's a fun, exciting brand of basketball, but again, you see how the bench, and they really truly are all in this for each other, and that's special. Again, you cannot fake that. That's not something that Kenny can get up in a halftime speech and say, "Guys, I need you to cheer for one another." They either do it or they don't. And I don't think I've been around a group really ever that's quite embraced each other like this group, and it's a credit to those guys because they've done a heck of a job.
Kenny, you won 42 with a team that some guys were barely hanging out in this league when they got here, and a lot of guys have gotten better. And don't you now go to Sean and say, "Get me a real A-list type guy, and I can get you 50 or something like that"? I mean, doesn't it speed up your timetable seeing what you've done with guys who, are not at that level?
No, and I think, like Sean said, it's a lot's going to depend on our roster. Things could change next season, but listen, we huge credit to Sean and his group. We got the right player. We signed the right players. We drafted the right players. We traded for the right players. That's really the story of this season. And now the challenge for us and Sean is, I know the kind of the message yesterday from our players, like, we want more. Like, I don't think we're sitting here satisfied. Obviously, it's always been about strategic and gradual improvement, and I'd like to continue that without making outlandish statements about championships and all that stuff. I think we're going to double down on the way we've been doing things, no matter what our roster looks like, and heavy emphasis on development and culture and all that. I'm really proud and convinced, like, this is the way to do it, and considering the predictions and everything, before the season, and it kind of confirms a little bit, hey, this is the right way to do it. Our process is right, and like I said, we're going to keep in the same direction.
I guess for Kenny and Sean, a couple of the veterans, I think it was Jared Dudley and Damari Carroll, talked about that large training staff that you guys employ. They referenced it as 30 people. I don't know how many people, but you can allocate your resources any way you see fit. I'm just wondering, what was the thinking behind having that big of a group in the training staff, and then how have you seen that impact things on the court?
Well, I think it goes back to when we first embarked on this, was we're going to have to do things maybe slightly a little bit differently. We knew we weren't going to have a plethora of high first-round picks and so forth, so it's about developing guys both on the court and off the court, and teaching habits and so forth. So credit to ownership when they see a budget that maybe looks a little different than in the past, where we're going to have to spend money where maybe money hasn't been spent before. And our players bought in. We had the veterans come in here, and they've seen it. You can read their social media and everything else. They've seen it from other teams. They've been around the block a few times, and when they come here and say, look, things are being done a little differently, but you know what, at the end of the day, I feel better than I ever have. That's a credit to that performance team. And, I don't think it's quite 30, but it's up there.
I do think that's one, like, from day one, from even when we had the interview, that's where Sean and I were on the same page. That, we were both had backgrounds, my background in development and marrying that with, performance in Atlanta, and obviously Sean's role in San Antonio. So we had a common, a shared passion, for that department. I think we both understood and understand how important it is. And what I love, what we've built there is a global kind of staff. It's world sport. It's understanding, obviously, the NBA, but also getting great ideas from people that weren't in the NBA their whole lives. So we've really got great diversity there, and our players have embraced it. I think the old school way is saying, hey, you need a guy that's been in the NBA 20 years to be in that department, and I've learned a ton, from that group, and we, as a coaching staff, we're connected with them, and I think the players feel that, and they're benefiting from it. And at the end of the day, I know when I played, it was like, if I feel good, I'm going to play good. It really, sometimes, especially when you get older, so Jared Dudley, if you feel good, they got the corporate knowledge, they understand how to play the game. But if you go out there and your body's feeling great, you're going to bring it and play well. So I think we understand what that's all about.
How would you evaluate essentially the three rookies Musa, Karutz, and Pinson. You saw them the whole year, Pinson a little less, but did they meet your expectations?
Direct from me, Bob? Yeah, from our standpoint, yeah, all three of them have met expectations, in a lot of ways exceeded expectations. They know they have a plan this summer going forward with a development plan that is hopefully going to put them in even a better situation, better set of circumstances to succeed further. John, and I got to give a lot of credit to, embraced the role that he was given in Long Island, and there were close ties, obviously, between Brooklyn and Long Island. And Sean Fine did a heck of a job being the liaison between the two, so there was never a communication breakdown, which I think is very clear and what we needed. And I think the player respected that too, because he was never left in the dark. He knew exactly where he was. Theo, I don't know that there's anybody in the Nets organization that took quite as many plane flights and buses as he did this summer. So for him to be here 1 minute, there the next, and change of plans, now you're on a Uber to this shuttle to that bus ride, so I give him a heck of a lot of credit because he embraced his role, which was great. And then Rhodey, was thrust into it, through a set of circumstances, whether it may be through an injury or so forth. But I think we will see the eagerness for Rhodey to go out and play and compete. And, he's almost like sort of a baby deer out there where he doesn't know what he's quite getting into. But, the fact that he embraced that role, and I think we're finding out more and more about the more we see these guys and how hard all three of them want to compete, which is great.
Bob, I would say more like a cheetah, not a baby deer. That's and I would say exceeded expectations. Now, Sean and his group, they saw those guys a lot more, but I think it was a great injection of talent, across the board with all three of those guys, and that's, as a coach, as the rookies, you're like, is this guy really going to contribute this year? Like you're skeptical. It's just how the league works, and so the fact that, I told the guys yesterday, we definitely did this as a group, but I remember the Knicks game here when Theo comes in, flies in from a G League game and gets 19 points and 8 assists, and I don't think we win that game without him. And I mean, you don't win that game, maybe you don't make the playoffs. So, that does the contribute. And then Rhodey just stepping up and being a starter for us, and I don't think any of us imagined that. So, I think we've Sean again. We've done a hell of a job in the draft. I'm just thrilled with every guy we've drafted. It's been a real important for our improvement.
You talked about kind of doubling down on the way that you've done things here, and the culture and the development and so forth. Obviously, you've traded players, waived players, bought out players since you've been here. But in the case of, example, D'Angelo or any of the guys that you've developed, and he's the first All-Star that you've developed since 12-13, how tricky would that be to either, I guess, not bring him back, or however you want to couch it, in pursuit of trying to make the roster better versus, I guess, continuing the development? I mean, what kind of message, I guess, does that send, and how tricky is that inside your locker room?
I guess those are the things we have to keep navigating, and we see where it'll go. So, I think you're assuming the question was more like along the lines of he won't be back. Like, he's a Net. So as of right now, he's a Brooklyn Net, and that hasn't changed. And having lived it on a couple different sides, I understand the business of it. I get I've packed my bags many, many times, but I also see the dynamic in the locker room where it changes in those guys, and that's about having the right leadership in there. It's about having the right vets. It's about being honest and having honest conversations with your guys. Like, you never want to lead them astray. And I give Kenny a heck of a lot of credit because he has to do it on a nightly, daily basis and have honest conversations. And that's where a lot of the respect, comes from. When our players go, look, I want the truth. I'm going to see him. I'm going to ask him every single day where we stand, whether it's court time, whether it's availability, whatever it may be. And I think that should really just sort of go through the entire organization here, where you got to have honest conversations with players and at the right time and see where the chips fall. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.